Hi everyone, now you're watching my channel. All the content I create myself, new videos every day, so don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support means a lot. Thanks, bye!
Everyone at the table laughed when my brother called me the nobody of the family. My father did not correct him. Instead, he lifted his glass and said, "Blaine has built something real. You walked away and gave us nothing to be proud of." I looked down at my plate and said nothing. They had no idea how much I had learned to hide. I had returned to Virginia for one reason. My grandmother's estate had finally been settled, and I wanted to spend one quiet evening with my family before making my next move. I arrived wearing a simple black dress, the same kind of clothes I had worn for years. Blaine looked at me from across the table and smiled. "Still living like you have nothing?" he asked. I ignored him. My father continued talking about Blaine's latest construction project, telling everyone how proud he was of his son. When the conversation turned toward me, Warren sighed. Marlo never wanted a proper life. She always had to be different. Blaine laughed. "Different? Dad, she is just the family nobody." The words landed harder than I expected. My mother, Celeste, lowered her eyes. Nobody defended me. I slowly placed my fork beside my plate. "You really know very little about me," I said quietly. Blaine leaned back. "What are we supposed to know? You disappear for years, come back with no fancy car, no big house, and refuse to tell us what you actually do." I almost smiled. They had spent years judging me by what they could see. Before I could answer, the dining room doors opened. A tall man in a decorated military uniform stepped inside. The room went completely silent. General Everett Calloway walked directly toward me. Blaine's smile disappeared. My father stood halfway from his chair, confused. The general stopped beside me, looked me directly in the eyes, and raised his hand in a formal salute. "Colonel Bennett," he said, "I'm sorry we kept you waiting." Nobody moved. I returned his salute calmly. Then I looked across the table at my father. For the first time that night, Warren Bennett had nothing to say. His face had gone pale, because he finally understood that the daughter he had called a nobody had been living a life none of them knew anything about. 12 years earlier, Marlo had stood in her father's office with a college diploma in her hand and a decision that changed everything. Warren had already arranged a comfortable job for her at a private company owned by one of his closest friends. He expected her to accept it without question. Instead, she told him she had decided to join the military. Warren stared at her as if she had insulted him. "You had every door open," he said. "Why would you choose that life?" Marlo tried to explain that she wanted to serve, learn discipline, and build something on her own. Her father only became angrier. He said military service was not the future he had planned for his daughter. Blaine made things worse. He laughed whenever Marlo came home in uniform and told relatives she would give up once things became difficult. He often joked that she would eventually come crawling back and ask Warren for a job. Marlo stopped defending herself. She learned that explaining her dreams to people who had already judged them only left her exhausted. Her training was difficult, and some assignments pushed her further than she had ever imagined. She worked long hours, accepted responsibility, and slowly earned promotions through results rather than family connections. She rarely told anyone at home what she was doing. It was not because she was ashamed. She simply understood that her family measured success by money, titles, and appearances. The one person who never questioned her was her grandmother, Inez. Whenever Marlo visited, Inez listened without judging. She also understood Warren better than anyone. One evening, Inez warned her that Warren had spent years protecting Blaine from the consequences of his choices. Before Inez died, she pressed an old brass key into Marlo's hand. "One day," she whispered, "you'll understand why your father is so afraid of losing control." Now, standing beside General Calloway, those words returned to Marlo. The salute had reminded her how far she had traveled since that painful argument with Warren. She was no longer simply an officer with a quiet career. She now held a classified leadership position and had recently received an assignment involving a federal contracting investigation. The company connected to that investigation was Bennett Strategic Construction, the business Blaine proudly called his greatest achievement. Marlo looked toward her brother and felt a heavy silence settle inside her. She had not come home expecting this, but the truth had already found its way back to her family. The next morning, Marlo returned to her temporary office and opened the files connected to Bennett Strategic Construction. She had seen enough during the first review to know that something was wrong, but she needed facts before allowing her personal feelings to affect her judgment. She went through payment records, contract reports, equipment lists, and approval forms one by one. Several numbers did not match. Some government invoices were much higher than the actual cost of the work. Equipment listed as delivered could not be found in the company record. Money had also been moved between accounts without a clear business reason. At first, Marlo hoped there was a simple explanation. Then she found a pattern. The same names appeared across several questionable transactions, and many of the approvals led back to Blaine. Her stomach tightened when she found Warren's signature on several documents. Her father had approved payments connected to some of the contracts under review. Marlo leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. She wanted to believe there was another answer. Maybe Warren had trusted Blaine too much. Maybe he had signed documents without reading them, but the records were becoming harder to explain. She reminded herself that her job was not to protect her family or punish them. Her responsibility was to follow the evidence wherever it went. She kept her work private and continued the review through official channels. That evening, Blaine acted as if nothing had changed. He made another joke about her military career and told everyone she had always been too serious. Marlo said nothing. He had no idea what she had already found. Later, Warren approached her alone. His voice sounded casual, but his eyes were not. "Why are you asking questions about Blaine's company?" Marlo looked at him for a moment. "Because some questions have answers people spend years trying to hide." Warren's expression changed immediately. He looked away and rubbed his hand across his face. That reaction told Marlo more than his words could have. She suddenly understood that the problem might be much older than Blaine's recent decisions. Her father was not simply worried about his son. He was afraid of what the records might reveal. Marlo walked away knowing that the family secret was deeper than she had imagined. Blaine was not as careless as Marlo had hoped. He soon noticed that people inside his company were being questioned and began asking who was behind it. He did not need long to connect the questions to his sister. Instead of facing the problem, he decided to attack her reputation. He started telling relatives that Marlo had changed after years in the military. According to him, she had become suspicious of everyone and could no longer think clearly. He said the pressure of her work had made her unstable. Marlo heard about the comments but refused to react. She knew that arguing would only give Blaine more room to twist her words. Her mother was different. Celeste came to Marlo's room late one evening and quietly asked her to stop looking into the company. "Please," she said, "whatever is happening, keep it inside the family." Marlo stared at her mother. "That is exactly what you have been doing all these years." Celeste lowered her head. Marlo asked why she had always remained silent whenever Warren protected Blaine. For a long moment, her mother said nothing. Then she admitted that Blaine had been treated differently since childhood. Whenever he made a serious mistake, Warren stepped in and fixed it before anyone outside the family could see the damage. Celeste told her that years earlier, Blaine had made a business decision that nearly destroyed the company. Warren had covered the loss, borrowed money, and made sure Blaine never faced the full consequences. Marlo felt a cold feeling in her chest. "Did that money come from a government contract?" she asked. Celeste looked toward the window. She did not answer. That silence was enough. Later that week, Blaine told Marlo she had no right to use the old office that had belonged to Inez. He ordered her to remove her things and threatened to change the locks. Marlo waited until he left, then remembered the brass key her grandmother had given her. She returned to the office and tried it on an old cabinet hidden behind a wooden panel. The lock clicked open. Inside were folders, letters, receipts, and copies of contracts. Marlo slowly picked up the first file. Her hands began to shake. Inez had left behind exactly what Marlo needed. Marlo spread the papers across the old desk and began reading. There were handwritten notes in Inez's careful writing, copies of contracts, bank statements, receipts, and letters she had kept hidden for years. The dates went back much farther than Marlo expected. Inez had been watching the family business long before Marlo ever suspected there was a problem. One letter made Marlo stop. Inez had written directly to Warren, accusing him of protecting Blaine after another serious mistake. She had warned him that his silence could put the whole family at risk. Warren had apparently dismissed her concerns and told her she did not understand how business worked. Another document showed that several family assets had been moved into different names shortly before Inez died. Marlo slowly understood why her grandmother had kept everything. Inez had known that one day someone might need proof, not just accusations. The documents created a clear timeline. Blaine made certain business decisions, questionable payments followed, and money later moved through accounts connected to people close to him. Marlo felt anger rising inside her, but she forced herself to keep reading. For years, her family had made Inez sound confused because of her age. They had told Marlo that her grandmother sometimes imagined problems that did not exist. Now Marlo could see the truth. Inez had been paying attention when everyone else chose not to. Marlo contacted General Calloway and explained what she had found. He listened carefully before giving her one simple warning. Do not let anger decide what you do next. Evidence must speak for itself. Marlo knew he was right. She scanned and secured the documents, then submitted them through the proper investigative channels. She did not call Blaine. She did not accuse Warren. She wanted to see what they would do when they believed they were still safe. For several days, Blaine acted normally. Then Marlowe noticed something strange. He began asking questions about the old office and who had entered it. That night, he returned to the property after everyone had gone to sleep. Marlowe watched from a distance as he entered Inez's office carrying a small bag. He opened the cabinet and started removing folders. Then he poured liquid over the remaining papers and reached for a lighter. Marlowe realized he was not trying to hide a mistake anymore. He was trying to destroy the truth. Marlowe stayed out of sight while Blaine moved through Inez's old office. She watched him search the cabinet and understood that he knew the papers were gone. He checked drawers, opened boxes, and looked behind the wooden panel where the cabinet had been hidden. When he found nothing, his face changed. He left the room quickly. Marlowe did not follow him or confront him. She recorded what she had seen and reported the incident through the proper channel. By morning, the atmosphere inside the house had changed. Blaine was waiting for her in the kitchen with Warren beside him. He accused Marlowe of taking family property from Inez's office. Marlowe calmly asked what property he meant, but Blaine kept talking over her. He claimed she had no right to enter the office and said she had been causing trouble since she returned. Warren immediately supported his son. He did not ask Marlowe for an explanation. He simply told her that she had crossed a line. Marlowe looked at her father and felt something inside her finally become quiet. For years, she had hoped Warren would one day see her for who she was. She had wanted him to understand that her choices were not failures. But standing there, she realized she no longer needed his approval. Warren told her to leave the house. The words hurt, but they did not break her. Marlowe picked up her bag and looked at him. Being related by blood does not make someone loyal, she said. Loyalty is something people earn. Celeste suddenly began crying. She admitted that she had spent years staying silent because she wanted to keep the family together. She had watched Warren protect Blaine again and convinced herself that silence was better than conflict. Blaine became furious. He stepped toward Marlowe and told her he would destroy her career if she continued interfering with his life. Marlowe did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him and said, "Be careful what you threaten. The truth is already moving beyond these walls." Blaine stopped. For the first time, he understood that Marlowe was no longer fighting for her place in the family. She was standing on the side of something much bigger than them. After leaving her family home, Marlowe met General Calloway at a quiet military office. He wanted her to understand why he had stepped into that dining room and saluted her in front of everyone. Years earlier, during a dangerous overseas operation, Marlowe had led a small team through a situation that quickly became life-threatening. Several service members were trapped after their vehicle was damaged, and the area around them was under heavy fire. Marlowe stayed behind when she could have moved to safety. She helped bring the injured men to cover and organize their evacuation. Everyone survived. When she was later offered personal recognition, Marlowe refused to take all the credit. She said her team had done their part and deserved the same respect. Calloway never forgot that answer. Over the years, he watched her take on harder assignments and greater responsibility. She became known for staying calm under pressure and refusing to bend rules for powerful people. That was why she had been selected for the current investigation. Calloway told her that the assignment was sensitive because the people involved had money, influence, and connections. Marlowe had been chosen because she could be trusted to follow facts instead of fear. She listened quietly. For years, her family had looked at her simple clothes and private nature and assumed she had failed. They had never seen the moments when other people depended on her. Meanwhile, Blaine's threat against her career was becoming more desperate. Investigators were finding additional problems inside Bennett's strategic construction, including records that matched the documents Inez had preserved. Warren finally began to understand what was happening. Marlowe was not trying to destroy the family business out of anger. She was trying to uncover what had happened to public money and protect the people who had been harmed by the wrongdoing. A few days later, Marlowe received confirmation that Inez's documents were authentic and important to the investigation. She sat alone after reading the message. Instead of feeling satisfied, she began to cry. She was not grieving for the people who had insulted her. She was grieving for the family she had once believed she could trust. She finally accepted that some relationships cannot be repaired by one person alone. Then she wiped her tears and returned to work. Blaine knew the investigation was closing in, so he made one final move. He claimed Marlowe had changed the records to punish him because of their family argument. Warren supported him and prepared to make a formal complaint against Marlowe. This time, however, Marlowe was ready. She did not shout or defend herself with anger. She simply placed the full timeline of the investigation on the table. It showed that the first concerns had appeared before the family conflict became serious. The records had been reviewed through official procedures, and every important step had been documented. Financial statements matched the information found in Inez's files. Several former employees also gave statements that supported the records. Blaine's explanation became weaker with every piece of evidence. Then Celeste made a decision that changed everything. She told investigators that she had known about several financial problems for years. She admitted that Warren had asked her to stay quiet whenever Blaine faced trouble. She also provided old emails, letters, and documents she had kept in a locked box. Warren looked at her with disbelief. He had expected his wife to protect him, as she always had. Instead, she had finally chosen the truth. Blaine's confidence disappeared when investigators found evidence he believed had been destroyed. Some of the missing records had been preserved in places he never knew about. The more they uncovered, the clearer the pattern became. Marlo watched the process without satisfaction. She had imagined many times what it would feel like to see her family finally face consequence, but the reality felt nothing like revenge. It felt sad. Later, Celeste apologized to her for years of silence. Marlo took her mother's hand and said, "Justice is not revenge. I just cannot keep sacrificing myself to protect people who betrayed me." Celeste cried and nodded. Warren eventually asked to speak with Marlo alone. His voice was weaker than she had ever heard. He admitted that he had failed her and asked whether she could forgive him. Marlo looked at the man whose approval she had chased for most of her life. "Maybe someday," she said. "But forgiveness does not mean I can pretend nothing happened." Warren lowered his head. For once, he had no argument. Marlo walked away knowing that the truth had finally been heard. The investigation finally reached its end. After months of careful review, the evidence was strong enough for authorities to take action against Blaine and Warren. They faced serious legal and financial consequences for the decisions they had made. Marlo's own conduct was also examined because of her connection to the case, but every step she had taken was properly recorded. She had followed the rules from the beginning and had never used her position to hurt her family. Her name remained clean. Bennett Strategic Construction could no longer continue as it had before. The company was taken apart, but investigators made sure that employees who had done honest work were not treated as criminals because of Blaine and Warren's actions. Some workers had families to support, and Marlo was glad they were not being punished for decisions they never made. When the legal process was over, Marlo received part of the inheritance left through Inez's estate. She could have used the money to buy a large home or prove to her family that she had succeeded. Instead, she chose something that mattered more. She created a scholarship in Inez's name for children from military family. It was simple, useful, and connected to the values her grandmother had taught her. Celeste also began rebuilding her life. She moved away from Warren's control and started making decisions for herself. Blaine had lost the power he once held over everyone around him. For the first time, he understood that Marlo's greatest revenge had never been making him suffer. She had simply refused to become bitter and cruel like him. Warren later sent Marlo a letter. He admitted that he had spent years believing money meant success and obedience meant loyalty. He finally understood that he had judged his daughter by the wrong standards. Marlo read the letter alone in her apartment. She read it twice but did not answer immediately. The words still hurt, but they no longer controlled her emotions. She thought about the young woman who had once stood in her father's office, hoping he would approve of her choices. That woman had spent years trying to prove her worth. Now Marlo knew she had never needed to prove it. Her father's approval could no longer decide how she saw herself. When I think about that family dinner now, I remember the silence more than the insults. General Calloway's salute had not been meant to embarrass my father or brother. He had simply shown respect for the person I had become through years of service, hard choices, and responsibility. Warren and Blaine finally understood how badly they had judged me, but I did not need their shocked faces anymore. For a long time, I had believed being rejected by my own family meant something was wrong with me. I thought maybe I had failed because I did not live the life they wanted. I had compared myself to Blaine because my father constantly did the same thing. But I finally understood that I was never a nobody. I had simply stopped performing success for people who cared more about appearances than character. Celeste apologized to me sincerely. She did not make excuses or ask me to forget what happened. I accepted her apology because I wanted peace, but accepting an apology did not mean returning to the old life. I kept my distance and created boundaries that protected the person I had worked so hard to become. I visited Celeste when I wanted to, but I no longer allowed guilt to decide when or why I came. A few weeks later, I drove to the cemetery where Inez was buried. I brought fresh flowers and stood quietly beside her grave. Then I took the old brass key from my pocket. It had once seemed like nothing more than an old piece of metal, but it had opened a door to the truth and helped me understand the woman my grandmother really was. I placed it beside the flowers. "You were right, Grandma," I whispered. "The truth eventually opens the door." I stayed there for a while, remembering how she had believed in me when almost no one else did. Then I walked back to my car. I was not looking for revenge anymore. I did not need to destroy anyone to prove my worth. I had built a life through courage, discipline, and honesty. That was my answer. Sometimes the strongest revenge is simply becoming so strong, honorable, and independent that the people who once called you worthless no longer have the power to define you.